Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Unfound. Now, I am Unfound's host, Ed Denzel. If you're looking in the background, you can see that I'm not in Clearwater Beach, Florida, where I live. I'm actually over here in Orlando, Florida, for a disc golf tournament. I'm a huge disc golf fanatic, if you don't know. If you listen to or watch the live show, then you already know that. Unfound Now is a monthly program that I've been doing for about a year now. This is where I analyze a recent disappearance and what qualifies as recent within the last few months. In fact, we'll be going back to the end of March of 2021. I wanted to do this because we are all about education at Unfound. Yes, we cover the disappearances. We do those for reporting reasons, for research reasons, for investigative reasons. But what we also try to do between myself and my assistants is we want to teach the public about missing persons cases. Theories that we've developed over the last almost 5 years since Unfound got started in September of 2016, and how we use those theories to analyze old disappearances, maybe even going back to the 1940s, but also these recent ones that occur that are still unsolved after a few months. Now, as you can see in the title, we will be covering the disappearance of Luis Davila from Bentonville, Arkansas. However, he disappeared while on a trip to Mexico. So I want you to keep that in mind. Before I get into some of the facts, I want to remind you that you are watching the YouTube channel, the Unfound Podcast YouTube channel. If you are not a member, I hope you will consider becoming a subscriber. And then once you do, please hit that little bell button. In fact, I was even telling a friend of mine about it today, that hit the little bell button so when we upload videos or do the live show like we do on Wednesday nights, you will get alerted so you don't miss anything. All right, so Unfound Podcast channel on YouTube, you could probably see there, has about 12,300 subscribers. And for a podcast that is mainly audio, we certainly do upload a lot of videos to this channel. So I hope that you will consider becoming a subscriber. So this evening, tonight, I am talking about the disappearance of Luis Davila. He took a trip to Mexico to see his girlfriend. And on the way back on March 29th of 2021, he seemingly, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this when I show you a map of Mexico and then the route from Mexico into the United States to Bentonville, Arkansas. But he was seemingly on his way back, and allegedly within a couple miles of the U.S. border, he was still in Mexico, and then he was never heard from again. So if you see me looking off to my right, your left, I'm looking at some notes. I do not do this off the top of my head. But he was 31 years old at the time of his disappearance, but my understanding is he has had a birthday since then, so he is now 32. He is Hispanic. He and his vehicle are missing. His vehicle is a 2016 Nissan Altima with an Arkansas license plate, and that license plate is 936 VET, 936 VET. Now, as I said, we are all about education here. So these are some three points that I want you to think about as I go through the map. And then when I come back, we will get into these 3 points much more deeply and how they relate to Luis's disappearance. Number one, in foreign countries, things get even more difficult. Number two, the FBI is not a cure-all. And number three, in any disappearance, we must determine, do the facts make sense? So once again, you will now see me do a diagram for the route, the map, the route that Luis would have taken from where he was in Monterrey, Mexico, back into the United States. I'll once again go through a few facts as I'm talking, and then when I come back, we will get into those 3 points much more deeply. Okay, the map that you see right in front of you and with the little blue line on it is the route from Monterrey, Mexico, down here where my pen is, going way up to the top of the screen to Bentonville, Arkansas, where Luis Davila lived. You will see right here that it says that a drive from Monterrey to Bentonville takes about 14 hours and 24 minutes. Now, what we don't know right at this time is that was Luis planning to drive all of this at one time? Or was he planning to drive halfway, get some sleep, drive the rest of the way? Or did he have friends in Texas or anywhere that he was planning to stop over at? I've not read anything regarding any of that. So I have to presume is that when he left Monterrey, he was in Mexico to see his girlfriend, that his plan was to go right back to Bentonville, and this balloon line is the most efficient route. Is it reasonable to think that he could have made this all in one drive? Absolutely. 14 hours. I've driven to Pennsylvania many times all in one trip, just stopping to get gas, and that was it. And that's it's about as, well, with gas stops, probably about 16 and a half hours. So I can do it. I think a lot of people could do that. So 14 hours does not seem like a long drive. I mean, when I drove from Florida way over here to Amarillo, Texas, during the summer of 2019, that's like a 25-hour trip. And believe it or not, the first day I drove 22 hours. It was something crazy. But so people can do that. So I don't think it's unusual to think that he left Monterrey with full intentions of making it back to Bentonville all in one trip. Now, if you've done some searches on Luis Davila's disappearance, you will find an interview that they did with one of his friends, a longtime friend, who said that Luis went to Mexico hundreds, quote unquote, hundreds of times. Not 10 times, not 50 times, not 100 times, hundreds of times. So he's very familiar with Mexico. Luis is Hispanic. I don't know what kind of connections he has to Mexico or any other country south of the border. I don't know. But it seems to me that he was an American citizen, fine by me, and that he was making this trip many times to Monterrey because he had a girlfriend there. What's unclear to me is how long had they been a couple? Did she ever come to the United States? Were there plans for him to move to Mexico or her to move to the United States or something? I mean, hundreds of times sounds pretty serious to me. I don't know if he was seeing this woman the whole time. I don't know how long they were dating. We just don't know anything about her. She's not been quoted in any articles or anything else. So why that is, once again, hard to say. Maybe it's because there might be a kidnapping angle to this and they want to protect her identity. That's totally possible. But I think that I would certainly like to know more about this situation of him driving down there, driving back. If he's gone down there hundreds of times, he was not an old man. He was in his early 30s. That's a lot of travel. So there's that. So from the articles that have been written, even though they've not been that in-depth, what has been said is that Luis was within a couple miles. He was on the phone with somebody. I don't know who that person is. I don't know the extent of the conversation. I don't know how long the conversation was. I could not find any information on it. But one of the points made in it was that Luis said he was a couple miles from the border and that he was going into a gas station. So to try to figure out, kind of narrow down where this gas station might be, we can just kind of backtrack using this route. Using this as the border, where is the 2 mile, where would be 2 miles from the border? That's right down in this area right here. I'll zoom in a little bit. In this general area, and being that I'm a bad American and cannot pronounce Spanish words that well, Riveras del Bravo, Madero, Los Alamos, these are about 2 miles. This area is about 2 miles from the border. So I guess he stopped in at a gas station in this area. However, later in this video, I will tell you why I think there might be some reasons to believe maybe that that's not true. All right, so just keep that in mind. So this is how far he would have been from the border, allegedly. And we don't know anything about this gas station. There is no information out there that I could find that did they go to these gas stations? Did they check the video? Did they ping his phone? Was this call he made to somebody the last call that he ever made, the last text? There's no information anywhere that I could find about any of it. You should also know that the most recent article I could find on this disappearance was from April. So 2.5 months ago. So just a couple weeks after this disappearance happened. I don't know why that is either. So, but if you're wondering, and you've seen what I've seen, that he was within a couple miles of the border, this is the area that he would have been in. My perception, I've never driven to Mexico, but this Route 85 seems like a fairly popular road. It does not seem to me like, if he's within 2 miles of the border, obviously he was in a city area. It was not like he was driving out by himself in the middle of nowhere and might have, somebody might have seen this as an opportunity, seeing a person from the United States driving by himself. In fact, I have to tell you, I'm inclined to believe the opposite, that if they think it's an American citizen, they see that American license plate, I think they might be more inclined to avoid it. If they're thinking about kidnapping somebody, attacking somebody, robbing somebody, I think they'd be less likely to do that given all the attention that it would get. So I just don't know. But that is the map. Once again, he was from Bentonville, Arkansas. Was in Monterrey, Mexico, down here at the bottom of the screen. Had been there hundreds of times. I don't know how long, though, he had been down there this particular time. But in late March, he started his trip, seemingly planning to go back to Bentonville. And his last call was made right at the American border within 2 miles of it. And like I said, later in this video, I will talk a little bit about how him stopping in a gas station 2 miles from the border doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So there you go. This is the map and some more facts and a little more explanation regarding the disappearance of Luis Davila. Okay, and I'm back. Before I get into these 3 points, I want to remind you that we have a Patreon account, patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. If you'd like to donate to the program, become a supporter, that's how you do so. We also have a PayPal account, paypal.me/Unfound Podcast. If you don't know, if you're maybe finding Unfound in this channel for the first time, Unfound is a missing persons podcast that comes out every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. The rule is that we do not cover a disappearance on the program until it is a year old, but this is why I developed Unfound now, so I would have the opportunity to talk about disappearances that are much more recent. I also host a live show on this very channel on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern. It usually goes for about 2 hours, so 9 p.m. Eastern to 11 p.m. Eastern time in the United States. And probably the first half hour is me just talking about things that are going on in my life. A lot of the viewers like to talk about music and a whole bunch of other topics that have nothing to do with missing persons or true crime. And then right around that 9:30 mark, I start talking about some items, true crime items, missing persons items, news, things like that, that I start talking about those. Everybody that is watching gets to comment. And then before the live show concludes, I give a preview of that coming Friday's episode. So I hope you will consider watching on Wednesday nights. So allow me to remind you of the 3 points that I mentioned towards the beginning of this video. Number 1, in foreign countries, things get even more difficult. Number 2, the FBI is not a cure-all. And number 3, when we look at a disappearance, do the facts make sense? So let's start with number 1. In foreign countries, things get more difficult. Now, if you follow Unfound, maybe not since the beginning when it started in September 2016, but if you've listened to maybe 50 or 75 episodes, we have over 200 now, you know that missing persons cases are very difficult. They are the toughest of the toughest of the toughest for many reasons. But when you start thinking about Americans going to Mexico or overseas and they go missing, that even makes it more difficult than if they were to go missing right here in the United States, where I am. Likewise, when foreigners, travelers, people here, for example, on visas, green cards, whatever it may be, if they come to the United States for work or whatever else, many people, of course, come to the United States for tourism. If any of them get lost while they are here, despite our extensive law enforcement in the United States, despite all the video cameras that we have in the United States, despite GPS and phones that I think a lot of these people still can use while they're here in the United States, it even makes it much more difficult for them, for their families, wherever they're coming from, whether it's Canada, which is kind of, I guess, like the United States, or from a country in Europe, the Middle East, Russia, the Far East, Japan, China, wherever. Any of those people coming to the United States, they go missing here. It is even more difficult than it would be if they disappeared in their own country. And it has a lot to do with cultural aspects. Even though we have the internet, even though we have a lot of different ways to communicate with each other these days, and the world seems very small, when something like this happens, somebody comes to the United States then goes missing, whether it's they've chosen to do so or there was foul play, it's incredibly difficult. It's incredibly more difficult than if an American goes missing in the United States. So I don't want anybody to think that what I'm talking about here has to do with Mexico. It doesn't, okay? This is an American citizen. He's in Mexico. That's why we're talking about it. I would be talking about it the same way if he were in Canada, if he went to Europe, if he was in Italy or England or France or anywhere else. It was just a disappearance that caught my eye that I think many people can learn a lot from. Okay, so we have to keep that in mind. Now, in Unfound's repertoire of disappearances, we've covered one person who went missing from Angola in Africa, Ben Charles Padilla, who was an aircraft mechanic / pilot, who it seems stole a jet, along with the help of one or two other men. They are still missing. The jet is still missing. And that is a disappearance that we covered very early on in Unfound's existence, going back to September of 2016. Of course, the big difference is if a plane, an airliner, which in this case it was a Boeing 727, if it were to take off from an airport in the United States, it would be tracked. We have all sorts of radar, both civilian, government, public, private, military radar that covers the entire United States. Africa is not like that. And because of that, I think it allowed this jet to take off and not be tracked. Of course, that would not happen in the United States and many other places. But he was an American. He went missing over there, and he's still missing, and it's been 18 years now since he went missing in Africa, along with the jet. We've also covered the disappearance of 3 Canadians in the United States back in 2017. Their names are David Medot, Kent Monroe, and Omar Shearer. They went on a diving expedition with a friend of theirs, Jeff Wandich. Jeff came back. They did not. And I've gotten to know Dave Medot's father very well. He was the guest way back in 2017. And I have to say, even though he has very complimentary things to say about the United States, about law enforcement officials in Florida, down there, south of where I live in Clearwater Beach, where this all happened, you have to believe that if this had happened in Canada, where these 3 young men are from, similar circumstances, instead of them being out in the Gulf of Mexico, let's say they were out on Lake Superior, it would have been different. I don't know if necessarily the disappearance would be solved, But it's tough for any foreigner to be able to keep in contact with American officials, Florida officials, local officials there in Florida, here in Florida, and really keep up on what is going on in his missing son's case and the other young men who went missing. And you have to remember, this is a disappearance now that is over 20 years old. So it adds another layer of difficulty. And it very well may be if those 3 young men were Americans and went out there and 4 went out there and only 1 came back, maybe this still might be solved. But I happen to believe from my experience that the communication lines would probably be a little clearer than they are maybe between the families of these 3 missing young men and their families that still live in Canada. So we have to also remember something else, that even though here, at least here in the United States, I know Unfound has listeners all over the world. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Mexico, but it can be a dangerous place. Drug cartels control much of the country. The government, the army is trying to fight against them. It can get very bloody. It's a very violent country. But we also have to remember millions and millions of Americans have gone to that country over many, many years, and 99.999% of them come back no problem. Now, of course, a lot of them are going to very touristy areas, but it is not common for an American or any, I guess, traveler, business traveler traveling for pleasure. It's not very common for foreigners to go missing or be murdered in Mexico. So I want you to keep that in mind. I don't want you to see Luis Davila's disappearance as being some sort of epidemic of foreigners going missing there. I don't think this is what is going on. All right, I don't know if there are any facts to support that. All right, so I just want to keep that in mind as well. But still, you as speaking to my fellow Americans, if you go to Europe, if you go traveling, as many now that COVID is now over, keep in mind, you may be going to a country that is considered to be very safe. They have very low crime. But please keep in mind, if you were to go missing, whether it's something that happens to you or something, whether a foul play or something happens to you mentally or something like that, it is going to be very difficult for your family to keep up on the investigation. Just keep that in mind. All right, please do. So once again, when it comes to Americans being in other countries or or foreigners, travelers coming to the United States, disappearances get infinitely more, even more complex than they already are for Americans going missing in the United States. Please keep that in mind. So that is number one. Maybe something else that I can add to that. We think about cruise ships. These disappearances on cruise ships seem to get a lot of attention. And I think that we've learned over the years, there was a young woman who went missing, I believe her name is Amy Bradley, who is still missing. And she was on a cruise ship. And of course, everybody goes on a cruise ship. They get on a ship in the United States. The ship goes down to the Caribbean or goes down like maybe the western side of Mexico. And everything seems fine. But keep in mind, you are not on U.S. territory while you are on those cruise ships. Those cruise ships are flagged in other countries for all sorts of different reasons, including regulations and taxes. So this is why a lot of these investigations of people who go missing on cruise ships seem to be so complex. Sometimes there seem to be cover-ups and things like that. And that is just as if you were going to a foreign country and going missing there. So please keep this in mind when you travel. And for those of you who want to learn more about missing persons cases, also keep that in mind as you analyze what could have happened to somebody, whether it's somebody coming from somewhere else to come into the United States, somebody from the United States going to another country, or maybe a Canadian going to Europe, or somebody from Europe, a German going to Japan, and that person goes missing. This always the same phenomenon, that it makes a disappearance very, very difficult. And I think that's what Luis Davila's family has been experiencing for almost the last 3 months. So, number 2, the FBI can't fix everything. If you find stories on Luis's disappearance, you're going to find that the FBI seems to be kind of involved. His picture, his profile information is on the FBI site. You might even see that it's mentioned that he might have been a victim of kidnapping. And there may be among the general public, maybe a lot of people who don't follow true crime, who don't listen to Unfound, have never watched the show Disappeared, don't follow the ID, Discovery on ID, or is it ID on Discovery? I always get confused. But I think the general public may get the idea that the FBI is involved in a lot of disappearances, because we think of them as the main law enforcement agency in the United States. They sure as heck do a lot, and they do a lot of investigations overseas. There's no denying any of that. However, my experience in covering over 200 disappearances, most of those being in the United States, a few in Canada, and that one from Africa, the fact is the FBI is not involved as much as you think. Okay, I think that that's a misconception. I think that comes from Hollywood. I think that comes from a lot of movies, comes from TV shows, comes from novels, and it's a great plot device, surely. But in reality, that's not true. 99% of the disappearances we've covered on the program, maybe not 99%, maybe 95%, the topic of the FBI never comes up. They aren't involved in the investigation. They might not even know that the missing person even went missing. So we have to keep that in mind. So when you hear about Luis's disappearance, the FBI is involved because it's an American in another country. But I don't want you to think that that happens a lot. In addition, that does not mean that the FBI is working that missing persons case every day, 24/7 until it's solved. That's not a fact either. The FBI does not have, unless they're allowed to, it's not like the FBI can just go down into Mexico and do it at once. The FBI is going to coordinate with Mexican officials regarding Luis's disappearance, and maybe they'll work together, but it's always the Mexican government, the Mexican police taking the lead. The FBI is there in an advisory role, looking out for an American citizen and offering help, offering suggestions. If it is a kidnapping situation in Luis's case, although we're now 3 months in, and I have to say, I think that possibility, the odds of that lowers every day, the longer this disappearance goes. But that will be the role that the FBI will play, even in something like this, where FBI does have at least some responsibility. But my point is that if you think that the FBI is really, really, really involved in missing persons cases in the United States, they're not. In fact, even the one that comes to mind, and I have it written in my notes here, are the disappearances of Laura Bible and Ashley Freeman. And that is a case that happened in 1999. Ashley's parents were murdered. The girls disappeared. And we now know that the murderers took the girls, restrained them, raped them, and then murdered them after several days. Although their remains have still not been found. But one man, Ronnie Busick, is now in prison for this. Unfortunately, the 2 other men died during the process of the investigation that took about 20 years. But the FBI was involved in that disappearance. But if you go back and listen to that episode, it very well may be that they might have gotten involved at least for a few days just because Laura and Ashley were under 18. They were not adults. But really the main reason they were involved is because right around the same time that Laura and Ashley went missing in Oklahoma, Welch, Oklahoma, the FBI was having some sort of conference or meeting or something in the biggest city near there They found out about all of this, the murder of the parents, this big fire that happened that was related to the disappearance and the murders. And they came in and helped for a while, but eventually they went on their way. And law enforcement in Oklahoma became responsible for their disappearances, for the murders. And that's now the way it's continued to this day. And in fact, it was Oklahoma law enforcement that eventually kind of broke the case open, not the FBI. So we as Americans, of course, the people who live in Canada and elsewhere that follow Unfound, I'm giving you maybe a little background about how law enforcement works in the United States. But in your country, I'm sure you have some sort of national police force. Of course, in Canada, it's the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP. And they get involved in disappearances. It seems, though, much more than the FBI does in the United States. That is my perception, but I'm not a Canadian citizen. And although I have covered a few disappearances there, maybe 5 or 6, something like that. But in those disappearances, we almost always talk about the RCMP. Whereas in the United States, with all these Americans that we've covered who've gone missing, very, very rarely. Okay? Now, granted, the FBI can offer things. The FBI does keep criminal stats. I refer to them once in a while on the program. And certainly the FBI does get involved in missing persons cases once in a while, but it's very, very specific situations. The vast majority of missing persons cases, the FBI does not get involved. They don't even know that the missing person, the case even exists. Okay, I just think that, once again, I think the public perception on that is off. So that's point number 2. Not to mention the FBI can't fix everything. The FBI can get involved, but there are a lot of disappearances the FBI has been involved in that are still unsolved. It's not a cure-all. The FBI is not a cure-all. Although there is a perception out there that they are, but they're not. This takes me to point number 3. And anytime, this number 3 is, do the facts make sense? And anytime that you run across a missing persons story, and granted, my complaint would be that most original stories, first stories on missing persons, people who've gone missing, are very bland. They don't give you a ton of details. Why that is, I don't know. I mean, I worked with the Trib for a year. The Tribune Review in Pittsburgh, I'm kind of shortening that up. The Tribune Review in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for the entire year of 2018. I enjoyed working with them, but I also found that they were not willing to go into the details as much as I'm willing to go into them on my program. That's a fact. I think if you go back and read those articles where I worked with them on missing persons cases in Western Pennsylvania, you would see that those articles are not as in-depth as the interviews I do for the program, the episodes that come out every Friday. So, but when you're looking at that, if there are facts, you should always sit back and think, do these facts make sense? Now, how that relates to Luis's disappearance, Luis Davila, is something I mentioned during the map part of this video. In that I saw an interview with one of his friends, and this friend said that he had called, I don't know who it was, but Luis was on the phone. He said that he was 2 miles, or maybe he just said a couple miles from the U.S. border, so he was still in Mexico, and he was pulling into a gas station. And that is the last time anybody ever heard of him. Now, on the surface, nothing seems weird about that. I don't have any experience driving to Mexico. I've been in Mexico, but I flew there. I did not drive there. But people do drive to Mexico. In fact, there are Americans, I'm guessing, that work in Mexico, cross the border every day. So a lot of people in the United States have that experience. But does it make sense that somebody who is coming back from Mexico, way down there in Monterrey, would stop just a couple miles from the border with the United States to stop into a gas station? Why do I say that? Well, the first thing I thought about, and I actually checked this, is that why would he be getting gas if he was almost in the United States? You should know, gas prices, I know gas prices are kind of up in the United States, and they were starting to go up kind of in March. But no matter, whatever, gas in the United States is a lot cheaper than it is in Mexico. And in fact, I've even read some articles where Mexican officials, people who live, Mexican business owners who live very close to the border with Texas, for example, they get very ticked off because they find out about Mexicans who drive over into the United States just to get gas. That's how much cheaper it is. So does it make sense then that Luis is so close to the United States, within a couple miles, and he's pulling into a gas station? I mean, could he have not made it a couple more miles, get over the border and get in the United States and buy cheaper gas? This even, I can relate to this when I've been to Canada. Canada's gas prices are much higher than the United States. If the price of gas in the United States is $2.50 a gallon, in Canada, it could be $6 easily. Now, granted, they go in liters and it's Canadian money and everything. Once you do all the conversions, it's way more expensive than gas in the United States. So I know when we've gone to Canada, what we usually do is we get gas at the last possible place you can get gas in the United States before going across the Peace Bridge into Canada. We go up to Rice Lake. That's where we usually go fishing. And usually we cannot make it there and back on a full tank of gas. So what we do is when we're coming back, we only get enough gas to get us back into the United States. Then once you get into the United States, you get gas again because, once again, it's cheaper. You don't want to spend any money in Canada getting a lot of gas, but once again, because it's so expensive. This is the same situation in Mexico. Now, it very well may be he was almost on empty, but like he said, it's only a couple miles. So are we really saying, and he didn't say, we have to remember, he said he was going to a gas station. At least to my knowledge, he didn't say anything, well, I almost ran out of gas, I had to go into this gas station, just going to get a couple bucks and I'll get more gas. To my knowledge, it doesn't sound like he was that specific. And see, these are the things that, as a missing persons reporter, as a researcher, as an investigator who has had his boots on the ground in a variety of places for disappearances, this is something that always catches my ear, because it doesn't quite make sense. There's nothing unusual about anybody stopping in a gas station in Mexico, but it does sound unusual to me that somebody who's headed back to the United States would stop at a gas station right before going back into the United States. Of course, the big problem with this, as I've mentioned many times, is trying to apply logic to seemingly illogical situations. To me, him stopping at that gas station does not make a lot of sense. Maybe he has to go to the bathroom, but once again, are we saying that he couldn't hold it until he got into the United States? I don't know. I could see him stopping in a gas station to go to the bathroom. Makes all the sense in the world. But, we've all been on the highway, and sometimes you have to pull over to the side of the highway or whatever. But there's once again something about it that does put a big question mark in my mind. Now, there are some cases that we've covered many cases in Unfound's catalog, where the facts don't seem to be logical. For example, I have in my notes Regina Marie Boss, who disappeared in Lincoln, Nebraska, about 20 years ago. When her car was she went out on a night on the town. Her car was eventually found. The trunk was open. The car was not harmed. She's missing. The guitar that she highly prized was in the car, but the trunk was open. Nobody knows why, and that's a disappearance that's still unsolved. We have Dominic Grisham, a young man from Rochester, New York. His mother was holding a birthday party for him. She went out to do some shopping. He's home with one of his brothers and I think an uncle. While he's there, he gets a call on his cell phone. He's having a conversation. He walks out the door of his house, never comes back, never seen again. And that disappearance is, 15 years old or something like that. No, maybe even longer than that. It doesn't seem like it's possible that something would happen like that. It doesn't seem logical, but that's what happened. He went out the door and never came back. 16 years old, I think he was. He was certainly still in high school. And then another disappearance we have where the facts just don't, we have facts, but it's hard to put them together in a logical way. Dorian Myers, a woman who disappeared right here in Florida many years ago. Her house was burned. The interior of it was burned. It did not burn down. The outside was just fine. It was everything on the inside was torched. And then her car was found an hour and a half away, and it had also been burned. And still that disappearance is unsolved. And that's a kind of disappearance so rare for a house to be burned and a car to be burned. It's so rare I can't even begin to explain how odd that would be. But those are the facts, and it's hard to logically put them all together. So getting back to Luis Davila's, he once again stopped what he was telling people on the phone 2 miles from the border to go into a gas station. We have to start thinking, well, why would he do that? I think we have to maybe start considering the idea, being that that fact doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We may have to start thinking about the idea that either that call was coerced, and maybe that's where the whole kidnapping angle of this disappearance starts to come into play, or maybe he was just lying about it just because. Maybe he had no intentions of coming back to the United States. We just don't know. We must think about these things. Really, I know once again that Mexico can be a violent place in certain areas, driving around by yourself. He is driving an American car, or I guess a Japanese car, but a car with an American license plate on it from Arkansas. Somebody might see it's an American citizen. But like I said before, not too many Americans go missing in Mexico. It's very rare. And in fact, that may be the reason that Luis's disappearance has gotten so much attention, is because it is so unusual. But somebody might have seen him as a target. And we have these kinds of disappearances in the United States. If we're to really believe that he went to a gas station, that in fact just last month, the Unfound Now that I did, Cynthia Ba Traore, she went missing in Texas. She was last seen in a gas station on video. And then her car was found many miles south of that gas station, parked on the side of the highway. So these things happen even in the United States where people are last seen in a gas station. So once again, that third point being, do the facts make sense? I have to admit, from my experience of covering over 200 disappearances, something about Luis stopping at a gas station does not make a lot of sense to me. All right, and maybe that's where this whole disappearance, not just that's the last place, but we have to start analyzing that particular point. What does that mean? Has video cameras been checked? I've been checking. No stories have been written about this disappearance since April. There's no stories about last pinging of his phone, which they could do in Mexico. There's no stories about, does video show him stopping anywhere at any gas station in Guerrero, right across the border from Laredo, Texas? We haven't heard anything about that. This causes me to think that there may be something else going on here, and that he really was not at a gas station. Just something to think about. So once again, the main 3 points for this, the disappearance of Luis Davila, is that in foreign countries, things get even more difficult than they already are regarding disappearance cases. Number 2, the FBI is not as involved as everybody thinks, and they can't fix everything. And number 3, you should always be thinking about, do the facts make sense when you read about a disappearance, a new disappearance like Luis Davila's. And that concludes this episode of Unfound Now. I once again remind you to become a subscriber to this channel that you're watching right now. And please hit the little bell button so you'll get a reminder when we upload videos. I also would love you to join us on Wednesday nights for the live show that happened 9 p.m. Eastern. I'm right here like I'm sitting here, except it'll be at home. And the episodes come out every Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern. And if you've not, don't know anything about Unfound, maybe you're finding out about Unfound for the first time right now, go to theunfoundpodcast.com, our website, a very good missing persons site. And check us out on iTunes, Spotify, Podomatic, Stitcher, a variety of places that you can find the Unfound podcast. And it's coming up on its 5th year anniversary at the beginning of September. Once you subscribe and start listening, there's over 250 total episodes. That's a lot of listening time, and we'd love to have you as a listener. And I thank you for watching this episode of Unfound Now.